AudiobookHubs that provoke. This book is trying to air some of my views, perhaps uncommon and controversial, about a few issues that we constantly grapple with. All my observations may not be fully and unquestionably right, nor will they be a farce, and completely devoid of merit. Written by Roy T. James. Part 3. Chapter 11. Mind and Matter. What differentiates the two? Mind and matter. What differentiates the two? When Buddha says, the mind is everything, what you think you become, or when you listen to many other sages who announce rather non-intuitive universal truths, like our image of reality as an illusion, what should we gather? Or when we consider that an illusion, called Maya, originates when we confuse the reality we experience with the physical reality, and Maya is the thing in itself, what do we mean? Are we to consider that our notion of matter as a solid substance, an abstract entity like the color green, is only a quality, appearing in consciousness? Is it a model of what is out there, but as with almost every other model, quite unlike what is actually out there? Where does matter end and mind begin? Is it a reversible relationship? I found this a very interesting challenge, for two reasons. No one in history has achieved greatness without giving an answer to this question, and there is nobody who did not achieve greatness after reflecting on the true nature of this question. But I find myself in a corner, whenever I think of an answer, in our journey behind the secrets of matter, which I think must be immensely gratifying since a whole lot of us are always on such trips. We are succeeding to reach more and more into the internals of matter. As we go forward with our studies with the internal structure of matter, its behavior seems to align more and more with that of the spirit, and the line separating the two concepts is becoming rather fuzzy. Terminology may differ, but one of the distinct marks of life, the unpredictability of responses, whether at the same time for the same trigger from different sources, or from the same source for the same trigger at different times, seems to be invading matter in its subatomic forms, as well as matter in its living forms. To illustrate, consider a magnet. If broken into two, we get two small magnets, each having the property of facing north. If we are to go on dividing till we reach the matter in its smallest size for independent existence, each and every one of those particles need not show this property. What we get will be a large number of elementary particles, the majority of which showing the north-seeking property of a magnet, and a stronger magnet will yield a greater percentage of particles with such property, the percentage tending to reach 100, as the strength increases. But if we select a particle at random and examine, it need not be a magnetic one with the property to seek north. The only thing certain about this is that, the greater the strength of the magnet, the higher the probability of the particle being a magnetic one. Now consider a non-magnetic material. If we are to go on dividing it till we reach the matter in its smallest size for independent existence, what we get will be a large number of elementary particles, the majority of those not showing the north-seeking property of a magnet. But if we select a particle at random and examine, that particle could very well turn out to be a magnetic one with the property to seek north. The only thing certain about this is that the probability of that particle being from a magnetic material, in the case of non-magnet, will be less than that for a magnet. As another example of the mind-body link, take multiple personality disorder, or dissociative identity disorder. This is a mental condition that's interesting on many levels. Perhaps most intriguing of all is how some sufferers not only exhibit personality and behavior changes as they switch between their different identities, but some also have measurable physiological variations between each persona. For instance, one of a patient's personalities may need eyeglasses and another won't. Or, one identity might be diabetic and another will have perfect health. In such cases, it isn't simply a matter of the patients thinking they need eyeglasses or insulin. Their bodies actually go through legitimate alterations, such as differences in intraocular pressure or blood sugar levels, as experiments have shown. As still another example, take the experiment involving Tibetan monks, where a group allowed physicians to monitor the monks' bodily changes as they engaged in a meditative yoga technique. During the process, the monks were cloaked in wet, cold sheets, 49F/9.4C, and placed in a 40F, 4.5C, room. In such conditions, The average person would likely experience uncontrollable shivering and would shortly suffer hypothermia. However, through deep concentration, the monks were able to generate body heat, and within minutes the researchers noticed steam rising from the sheets that were covering the monks. Within an hour, the sheets were completely dry. http://listfirst.com/2013-205/21/10 Amazing examples of mind over matter / Thus, when we consider a material object in its most basic form of existence, what is seen as the unpredictability of its nature, however well defined was its nature in normal circumstances. Also, the mind is showing certain definite signs, closely associated with matter. Isn't this pointing to a possibility? Material things, when they are in rather elementary forms, are exhibiting unpredictability, well associated with the spirit. Is matter a manifestation of spirit within certain constraints, like physical limits? Or is it that spirit has no role to play when things are beyond those constraints? Is matter a limiting case of spirit or vice versa? Or, as matter and energy are mutually convertible, and if we consider spirit as a form of energy, is matter and spirit different instances of the same entity? I think we are crossing milestones while searching for the secrets of matter. We need to begin a new quest for learning the secrets of the mind. Chapter 12: The Spiritual and the Material. What is the difference? I am amused by this enigma. All of us are treasuries of common sense, or so we think, for I have never come across anyone who seeks more of it. We also hold in abundance many other virtues of the modern world, like adaptability, scientific temper, or an open mind, or at least, we try to be so when confronted with an issue belonging to the material plane. We analyze the issue, weigh alternatives, formulate action plans, monitor performance, learn from mistakes and update ourselves from the experience gained. If we are not capable enough to do it, we will at least catch others if they are not doing it. And the results are there for all to see. The human race is on a progress spree. Every day we learn new things. Much of it, in fact, end up in disproving some of our earlier notions, which we have come to accept as normal, and a definite sign that the human race is moving forward. Events and occurrences of the material world pointing to a great future. But exactly the opposite takes place whenever an issue belonging to the spiritual plane happens to come before us. First and foremost, we seek absolute submission. We also oppose with great vehemence anyone casting doubts on what we call as our basic tenets. We seem to be quite at ease to continue with our conceptual notions of the Middle Ages. The more reasonable we are in accommodating changes in any of the worldly areas, like scientific development or economic change, the more unreasonable we seem to be in opposing any deviations in our abstract world, like moral values. The same thing is true in the case of all natural or unnatural entities that can't be known conclusively to be belonging to the realm of the material, and we are not able to realize this since we judge our spiritual domain in a different manner. Assessment of one's performance in spiritual affairs is fairly simple. If the results obtained are not favorable enough, the deity was not pleased sufficiently. The onus of getting a favorable intervention being always on the one who is approaching divinity, there is hardly any room for anything else but humble submission. There are no signs of any change, as far as the outlook of our spiritual sphere goes. We welcome worldly changes like developments in science and technology, and the improvement they bring to our living conditions, however much the society is shaken by that change. We also adapt to new systems of governance, as harbingers of better things to come. But when it comes to a deviation in our abstract values, like the acceptability of same-sex marriage, we are quick to portray that as a warning of the imminent end of our race. When we observe any changes in the appearance, behavior or constitution of living or non-living objects around us, we generally react in an appropriate way. The aim always will be to find the cause, study, reflect and take appropriate action. Sometimes we go wrong, but on all such occasions, others are welcome to point out our shortcomings or omissions. We also acknowledge, at least partially, the fact that our forefathers would have made quite a few errors in their appreciation of material objects or phenomena around them, and we get those errors corrected. Thus, all things go towards the better, the makings of a happy life. Whereas when we observe any changes in the appearance, behavior or constitution of our abstract tenets, ceremonies or other conceptual entities, we either react in an unthinking manner or take a dogmatic approach, the aim always being to hide, discredit or kill the cause. We also acknowledge with great vehemence the infallibility of our forefathers and the need to correct whatever deviations that might have happened to our tenets. The strongest push always reserved for correcting or nullifying any such changes at the earliest, and we seem to be travelling farther into a dark past. All the progress we have made in our material life coming to its aid, both in accelerating the journey and in camouflaging the true destination. I think our forefathers forgot about the true destination many generations back, and we have come to accept its disguise, progress, as the true one instead of reverting to the societal control of the ancients, the ultimate destination. What necessitated such a disguise has been discussed in my book, The Unsure Male. However, for the sake of this discussion, let us consider progress as the true destination of mankind. This, I think, is a good summary of this dichotomy. The more fastidious, while looking for conclusive proof, say, for a physical phenomenon we are, in the material plane, the more naive we turn out to be, in matters spiritual. In fact, our natural or initial approach is one of immaturity and lack of good logic on all matters that can't be termed as fully belonging to the material sphere, or, in other words, on matters that can be termed to be belonging undoubtedly to the material sphere. People are encouraged to approach with an open mind. The cardinal difference between the material and the spiritual is this: we might approach strictly physical entities rationally, but to everything else, we show a rather opinionated face, that too, with a closed mind. Chapter 13: The Spiritual and the Material. Why are they different? Let us closely examine the distinctive features of both the worlds a bit more closely, starting with the spiritual one. The most significant one is this: not only that we are unwilling to question spiritual matters, but also are vehement in our objections to others doing so. The opposite is true for the material world. Not only that we are quite happy to question such matters, but also help others doing so. Notwithstanding our objections, if some of those continue with their attempts, they are sure to face the society's wrath. That too, on a scale much beyond the bite of usually expected reactions to the most horrendous crimes. And I think we consider more or less as normal, if that exposes them to large-scale violence and death, in addition to the public display of anger and hatred. In short, in the spiritual world, those progressive suffer. However, when we come to the material world, what we see is something dissimilar. Not only that we are bent upon questioning everything material, but also vigorous in urging others to do so. In spite of this, if some of us fail in making visible progress in research, we are more than willing to supplement their efforts, even if it is at our cost. In short, in the material world, those progressive flourish. In fact, what should determine the way we are disposed to think is our own perception of our world. Our idea of the reality around us would have been teaching us to think in terms of black and white, light and dark, up and down or good and bad. And we have been doing so all this while, with the real world as well as abstract thoughts. Now that our ideas of reality are undergoing tremendous changes, mainly owing to results encountered in quantum physics and related research, noticeable changes should have been happening with our abstract notions as well. Like, instead of viewing reality only as black or white, we should be thinking in terms of white, black, and neither white nor black. And our thought should have included new vistas of demarcation, like good, bad and neither good nor bad, or up, down and neither up nor down. But that is not happening. Why? In the material world, I think we approach an issue with an open mind because that is the best way to solve a problem, that is, of getting an answer, and the answer, which could be a new idea or improvement to an existing one, is to meet some need. The fulfillment of this need would have been making our life more comfortable, realizing that the potential to further our comfort could be hiding in each and every idea. We are always ready to acquire and assimilate new opinions, plans, and thoughts, however outlandish, impractical or laughable. A good example of such an approach is the way we look after our health. Whenever something untoward happens with our body, we consider it with an open mind. We take services of experts to examine the problem carefully and use whatever is available within our reach to remove the body part in full or at least in part and eliminate the root cause. We then institute ways of preventing such dangers to make our future even better. Whereas, when the same thing happens to our mind, we do not examine our mind, except in cases where the problem experienced by our mind is easily understandable or too obvious. We employ whatever is available within our reach to agitate everything else in our midst in full or at least in part, till the society is completely at home, with the disturbance filled, which could even be causing many other minds fall sick. Just as we are always seen desirous of a sound body, we can also find our efforts constantly make unsound minds. Why this difference? The often heard refrain, that the spiritual world is beyond the comprehension of man, has been successfully preventing the populace from any kind of research into these peculiarities, notwithstanding the fact that those are too obvious to be overlooked. On the contrary, we have been working overtime, that too in a resourceful manner, to locate peculiarities of behavior, even in cases where nothing obvious or noticeable exists, as far as the material world go. We are always ready to dismantle an old theory or formulate a new one, at the flimsiest of reasons. Therefore, it is amply clear that from both these worlds, i.e., the spiritual one and the material one, our expectations are vastly different. As far as the spiritual world goes, we don't seem to be willing to augur a change, and, as far as the material world goes, there is nothing more welcome than a change. In one case, a change could indicate to the end of the world, and in the other, it is a sure sign of progress. What can we infer from this? In the absence of any other indications to the contrary, we can safely conclude that both in the spiritual world and in the material world, all we are aiming is to remain happy or contented. Why are we confronted with two distinct entities, when our aim is only one, that is, to be happy? The most obvious answer is that these two worlds are there to meet two different needs in the human's quest for happiness, the spiritual ones generally acknowledged as the more important of the two. And from the above discussion, it becomes clear that the spiritual world is there to oversee that facet of the human which does not appreciate any changes if one is to remain happy. Similarly, material world may be taking care of that part of the human where wants and desires need to be constantly on the move for achieving happiness. Thus, our interaction with the material world enhances our knowledge, making it easier to derive all the benefits that can accrue. We are open-minded, receptive and tolerant while interacting with the material world, as such an approach helps us in acquiring more knowledge. And as we know more about our world, we can do things also more. More the number of things we do, greater the happiness we derive. But what does our interaction with the spiritual world do? As we can easily gather, our interactions with the spiritual world being so designed as to stifle the seeds of change, or that of independent thinking, the most likely result of such interaction will be prevent something that would have resulted from such a broad-minded or rational approach to life. What does free thinking lead to? Questions, from questions to answers, and so on, to culminate in what can be termed as progressive thought. Therefore, all that we do with the spiritual dimension of our life is to hinder progressive thought and to hasten reverting to the societal control of the ancients, as we discussed earlier. This makes it clear that we can't afford to be open-minded, receptive or tolerant while addressing the spiritual world. Chapter 14: The Spiritual and the Material. What, finally, is the takeaway? In my other hubs, we have seen that there are certain notable differences between the spiritual and the material. Let us now see how these particularities manifest and with what effects. What result do our material and spiritual interactions make? As far as the material plane is concerned, the proliferation of new things, ideas or both can be considered as the immediate effect, given that humans are happy only when they are able to keep themselves completely occupied. Standard approaches like the one shown here have been evolving over time to meet both these needs. This is leading to a greater number of societal transactions and new vistas to our aims and ambitions, in addition to the expected betterment of our lifestyle. But as our society adjusts itself to the new things or ideas, random signals or other disturbances that can agitate both the spiritual and the material worlds may emanate. This can be termed as the dormant effect of a new idea or change, When and at what trigger this will happen is entirely unpredictable. As far as the spiritual plane goes, the immediate result can be expected only when the new thing or idea directly impinges on the entity of God. Like the progress we made in astronomy, which dethroned all heavenly bodies from their position of eminence. When this happened years back, we also adapted smartly to those changes by redefining the very nature of God, away from such objects and more towards the abstract. Such a fundamental change could be happening again if conducive atmosphere envelopes our society. For example, an important discovery could augur such a radical move if our notion of the abstract undergoes a change as a consequence of that breakthrough. Think of our approach to internal or external stimuli. Whenever we are brought to confront something pleasant, the enduring experience is not enough to satisfy us. We will be on a search, making a threadbare analysis to study all facets of such an experience. Those who give a deeper insight into these stands to get honoured also more, providing natural encouragement to such a search, and we value this behaviour highly, the scientific temperament. Also, resilience is an asset here. The more comfortable we are with failure, the more the success we stand to attain. But our approach is not the same when we experience something unpleasant. Instead of examining the unpleasant events in a similar manner, the primary aim is to exterminate the event, effectively nullifying further analysis. Had we behaved rationally, our efforts would have been to study the manifestation of bitter feelings in detail, to prepare ourselves for the future. A good example of this paradox can be seen in our approach to the study of happiness. Though we know in detail about happiness and its dependency on certain chemicals, our information about unhappiness leaves a lot to be desired. As rational beings, unhappiness should have been subjected to a deeper study than happiness, since that would have given us a greater share of joy. Reduction in unhappiness, as one can easily gather, is less resource-intensive than addition of happiness. Also, in such cases, we seem to be waiting for a reason to get upset. Getting a response that is a deviation from the norm, or the exposure to an uncomfortable question, is sufficient to agitate the human society high enough to cause permanent harm. Resilience here is an anathema. The more easily we are upset, the stronger our faith. People applaud. What does this indicate? This, I think, indicates lack of stability. To put it more appropriately, the human society is always in a condition of unstable equilibrium, because of which a small or insignificant disturbance is enough to set into motion a chain of reactions, many of those unpleasant, and with long-lasting effects. We know that the specified behavior of any systems, equipment, or machines is valid only within certain operating limits of the parameters of interest, known as the linear range. We also know that every system is prone to wayward behavior, due to thermal effects, humidity, vibration, etc., and suitable precautions are to be taken to account for this. How do we make sure that a system operates in the linear range of the parameters of interest? By having an array of special devices, called safeties, incorporated into such systems or devices to prevent it from operating beyond the recommended range, for whatever reason. I think we can try the approach we take while introducing stability to physical systems in the conduct of our life as well. Take, for example, the steps we take to balance our daily life. When confronted with a failure, we are able to allay our sense of loss, or in cases of success, we are able to cap a relation from becoming obtrusive to others, thanks to intervention from another dimension of our life. That is, such interventions make sure that the material part of our life operates within the linear range of the parameters of interest. Why doesn't it happen in our spiritual world? Why is that whenever a disturbance happens to the spiritual fabric, instead of correcting itself, the disorder threatens to blow up the society, even in cases of tiny pricks, rather than self-correcting? Why do all of those add up to produce a huge ripple? This is where tolerance comes in. A reaction to a steady change or a sudden jolt varies depending on what the change belongs to, whether belonging to the material world or of the spiritual domain. In the material world, our aim is to maximize our satisfaction, happiness, or welfare, and we continually maintain our approach so as to make the material world itself, external disturbances, or both, to align with our good. And we learn from our experience, One should strive for the optimum. Here tolerances are forte. In case of the spiritual world, the opposite is true. We are ready to impose whatever restrictions are necessary to our comfort and well-being, and if it calls for, even to external inputs, to ensure that the spiritual world always comes out unscathed. Hence we have to be intolerant, even at our peril. This indicates that the spiritual and the material are serving two different and rather opposing needs of human life. The material domain can be understood fairly easily as something that can provide for our comfort and safety. But when it comes to the spiritual, assuming that here also our welfare is the one which stands to be benefited, its contribution seems to be as something that will suppress all that can affect our well-being. What does this portend? The giant strides mankind has been making in civilizing itself, for the last couple of thousand years, have successfully made a dent on the multi-layered safety cover of our society, the spiritual world. We are not able to be noticing this as each of the impacts was not powerful enough to make a mark. Now we are at a threshold. The combined effect of all those small impacts is reaching a high value and is poised to render the present spiritual system powerless. That will usher in a change. Until the transformation is complete and we are in receipt of a modified spiritual system incorporating the new ideas of the material world, we can expect a rather tumultuous environment. A marked disharmony between the spiritual world and the material aspirations, I think, will be the defining ambience of the coming years. What can we do? As noted earlier, our approach to the material world is one with an open mind, where we explore and identify solutions. And we are more or less successful in solving the problems encountered. But our approach to the spiritual world is exactly the opposite, where we wait for solutions to appear. An answer to our troubles with the spiritual world will certainly happen in due course of time. But we can save the mankind from the horrendous days of the intervening period if only we let natural changes to our spiritual domain to take its course, just as we encourage changes in the material domain. Chapter 15. Why is there unrest? Here we go. This is not an attempt to question our beliefs. I am sure that almost all of them extend invaluable help by providing us with a silver streak whenever we find ourselves in darkness. Whether we are affected by the moment, the setting or the environment, or we happen to become anything other than the most contented, these streaks are always there, to protect or console or offer us new hope. This is an attempt, however, in freshly evaluating the significance of those very streaks, with due attention paid to the rarely acknowledged fact that every silver lining serves also as an indicator to a cloud hiding somewhere behind the bright patch. And it is a cloud that we almost always fail to see. This too is true. Hardly any attempt has been made to search or locate such apparitions hiding behind the beliefs we humans hold in abundance, nor we have any idea how a silver streak metamorphoses into a belief. Hence, my limited aim is to have a peep on the other side of all that we consider closest to our hearts as unique elements of human character. In fact, what prompted me to think in this manner is my experience with physical systems. One of the important properties of any physical system, in fact, the property that defines the system, is the relationship between the parameters of interest under different conditions. Like the variation observed in input-output, error correction, disturbance stabilization, etc., when values of input change. One important quality common to all systems in this regard is that this defined relationship is valid only while the parameter of interest varies within a specified limit. And it is a big challenge faced by all engineers, especially those involved in designing various systems, to make it in such a way that all the components or parts of the system operate within its limit. When it came to living beings, I found that they are happy and contented as long as the severity of social transactions is within a certain limit, whatever be the nature of such transactions. Also, I noticed that considerable disturbance gets associated with their life, wherever the severity of such transactions cross that limit, whatever be the nature of such transactions. Irrespective of the nature and content of those exchanges, whether of pleasant nature or otherwise, both abundance and scarcity of extreme cases could be seen to be of comparable virtue, in causing visible discomfort. This also is true. Nobody has ever doubted the genuineness of the need for such extreme reactions. Rather, the attention was always on the act, which happened to be in progress, i.e., therefore, found it necessary to examine the disorder from a completely different angle. My attention then went to the most obvious example of this, the turbulence permeating our environment. The destructive effects produced by this could be visible in almost all elements of our society and in any corner of the world. What is in vogue is to attribute such disturbances to one or the other parts of our society, and depending on the time and place of the current instance of unrest, the chosen culprit varies. Sometimes religion is the culprit, it could be wealth in some other cases. From unemployment to overproduction, and from individual avarice to incapable leadership, nothing is there that has not been found as a cause. This unrest, in fact, is nothing special, though the popular view may be otherwise, and are normal transactions, but of a very high intensity. I could easily notice that, since the earliest days of life, this has more or less become a permanent feature of our world. Many times it has resulted in wars and other skirmishes, many a time in building empires. Our glories like explorations, discoveries and inventions can't be seen to be independent of its influence. However, instead of recognizing this simple fact, we have been attributing this turmoil to an unknown force. Sometimes we see this as a result of our sinful life, sometimes, which happens more often, caused by forces external to us, which become the villain in one's depiction of life. Thus, for one who is left-leaning, this unrest is due to the class struggle and capital is the villain. For a capitalist, however, it is caused by insufficient production, the villain becoming the productivity of labour. Also, any of the other common culprits of social disharmony, like an interreligious rivalry, caste oppression, male chauvinism or lack of faith in God, could become the baddie for those disposed to other viewpoints. We are making two mistakes. We are not examining the root cause, the propensity to resort to transactions of the extremes. We are compounding it by directing our efforts to an apparent cause, capital, religion or chauvinism, or things like that. Such local disturbances may be present in every society, but need not necessarily affect its state of health, since the disturbances mostly would cancel each other. Thus, beliefs make the human society a turbulent one.